Mark Baldock is down there as well, so if you have any of the technical questions, it'll probably be Mark that's answering those. I can do a lot of the talking part, but I'm not so hot on the technical questions. All right. So today I want to look at three aspects in the presentation. The library's role in research and repositories, the library's repositories developed at UniSA for research groups within our institution, and the future of research repositories at UniSA. So some of the library's roles, obviously, were no strangers to research and repositories. A large portion of libraries' resources are always spent on purchasing or describing or providing users with access to resources, and these are obviously used as part of research projects. And metadata expertise is also essential to our tasks. After all, if we buy lots of stuff, there's no use having it if people can't find it. Several libraries also provide workshops on where to publish your data or how to manage and track publications for grants or promotional applications, managing your references, etc. And at UniSA, the library is responsible for the University Research Archive, which is our digital repository for managing the research outputs which are produced at our institution. The library is also involved in the ERA initiative, which assesses the quality and impact of research publication outputs. So this is just a list of some of the stuff that the library has been involved in the last 3 years. So we've been quite busy, and we've been utilising our metadata and IT staff to collaborate with other research groups within the uni to develop repositories and meet the needs of different research groups. All of these repositories use international standards for metadata and archival repositories, and they're all based on a similar model with slight modifications as the repository requirements became more complex. And as we were developing the models for these repositories, the question emerged, can one size fit all? So, as I said, this is a list of some of the projects that we have done, and I'm going to discuss some of these today. First up is the archival repository for the Hawke Library. So the Bob Hawke Prime Ministerial Library is part of the main UniSA library, which is where Mark and I are both employed. Then we worked in a repository for UniSA's Architecture Museum, which was an ANS-funded project. And currently we're working on a metadata repository for Sant Datalink, and then hopefully next year we're going to start a new research repository for the Public Health Research Group. So to give you some background, the Bob Hawke Prime Ministerial Library was established in 1997 and is part of the main library at UniSA. It is responsible for the archival collections of ex-Prime Minister Bob Hawke, Senator Rosemary Crowley, Chris Harford, Dr. Basil Hexel and Sir Eric Neal. The 5 archival collections are kept on 3 sites within Adelaide and consist of over 1,500 archival boxes of materials. In 2009, a new team was appointed to the library, and at that time, documents which provided some very basic information on some of the speeches and photographs that were held mainly in the Hawke collection. Some of these speeches and photographs had been digitized, and some of them were available on the library's website, but it quickly came clear to us that there were large gaps in the metadata that we had to describe our collections. So after examining several archival management system softwares that were available on the market, it seemed to us that we would need to adapt our archival practices to fit around any of the software that was there. So after reviewing the ISO standards for metadata and archival systems and looking at several other systems that were being used in other archival institutions, I worked with the library IT staff to design and develop a repository to meet our needs. For this repository, we used the Dublin core schema for metadata, which was something that we were obviously very used of in the library environment, and we also made sure that the repository was OAI PMH compliant. The new repository was designed for metadata storage only, but one of the key aspects to the repository was that it would provide access for researchers to some of the items that had already been digitized, and this included over 2,000 speeches and photographs at the time. So the model we used. It's a very simple hierarchical schema. At the top is the highest and the most general type of record, which in archival terms we would call it a provenance record, but I guess for everybody else here it might make more sense if I called it a collection record. And this would include metadata to describe the general collection, so we have 5 of them for each of our archival collections. At the next level down, so within a collection record you would have several series records, and a series is a group of similar records on a similar theme or subject. Within a series record you would then have several folder records, so if you've ever seen an archival box, a lot of archival materials are paper, and so a lot of them are kept in manila folders. So within the folders you would have individual groupings that are all related to that series, but they focus on one specific element of that series. And finally, the most detailed items, they're item records, and they provide detail on one specific item within a folder. And the idea would be that any item that had been digitized would be attached to the record, so that means that the public would be able to go in and view the item record and then just click on the digitized item and have it available to them on the screen. And obviously this would mean that they don't have to contact the Huck Library staff as often to get access to the items in the collection. So the technology used, and I'll have to read this part. So the public interface for the repository was developed using Fascinator software. The digital object management, which is used by staff, is a Microsoft ASP.NET application with a temporary Microsoft Access database, and the storage used is Redbox or Fedora repository software. So staff go in and manually enter metadata using web-based forms. The metadata is then validated and stored in the database. Researchers in the public, they search using the Fascinator front-end software, and they can view metadata and digital objects online. In addition to the repository, a set of reporting tools were developed, and these allow staff to generate reports based on the metadata that's entered into the repository. So some screenshots, and these are all available. The public interface is available online. So this is the staff interface, which we use for entering metadata. Some of the fields are mandatory, which you can't see very well, but they do have a little red asterisk in them to let staff know which ones are mandatory. And you can also hopefully see that there is some links between the provenance or the collection record and the series records, which are already in the repository. And going from just this provenance record, you can click into the individual series records that are already there. So it's not a case of having to go back out again and then go back in again. It's all nice and seamlessly integrated into one interface. There's also admin fields down the bottom, which allow staff to capture the metadata that won't be displayed to the public. So if it's a private item, a personal letter that Mr. Huck's daughter wrote to him during an election campaign or something like that, we would try to keep stuff like that private. So the information, the metadata would be there, so people could see that we have the item, but you might want to put some personalized information into the notes field. And once the record is saved, then the system automatically saves the ID of the person to edit the record, the ID and time that the record was created, and the ID and time of the person that edited the record most recently. So this is what the public interface looks like. The screen search results are displayed on the left-hand side, and these include a brief description of the item, what level the record is at, and what format the item is in, so if it's a Word document or an image or an MP3 file. And users can also refine the search results using the facets on the right-hand side of the screen. So the outputs of this project was the repository, which was launched in 2009 for Mr. Huck's birthday, and now contains over 5,500 records, which provide more detailed descriptions of all the collections, particularly the Huck collection. It's called the Bob Huck Prime Ministerial Library, so we obviously focus on his collection first. But most importantly, the repository provides access to the digitized items which we have in the collection, and this has meant that there's been a decrease in the number of queries that we've had from researchers and the media and everybody else that have been looking for speeches and photographs. It obviously also means that we've had an increase in different queries, such as copyright queries and how they can use the photographs of the speeches that we now have available. But at least it means that we also have reduced the amount of physical handling of items, which is quite important given that it's archival materials. One of the issues with the development, however, was the use of the Fascinator software. At the time, it was open source software and it was still in development, so we couldn't really develop a lot of the functionality that we wanted to use, and possibly, in retrospect, we could have developed something in-house. So moving on, we then moved on to the University of South Australia's Architecture Museum, and we were asked to create a repository for them. So to provide some information about the Architecture Museum, it's a unique collection of more than 200,000 items significant to South Australia's architectural history. It's primarily a research centre, and the clients include students, academics, conservation architects, professionals, and several other groups. The museum is also recognised internationally and is the only Australian member of the International Confederation of Architectural Museums. Prior to the project, the metadata for the collections in the museum were held in 95 individual Word documents, which were saved on the museum's website. They obviously weren't very easily searchable as they were individual documents, and unfortunately they weren't updated regularly either. There's a high turnover of volunteers that staff this museum, so there was very little consistency in what metadata was recorded and how the metadata was recorded. So on the back of the Hawke Library repository, we were approached by the museum's director to develop a similar repository for the Architecture Museum. In 2010, we received funding from ANZ for a Seeding the Commons project entitled Taking Australian Architecture and Built Environment Records into the Commons. The objectives of the project were to create tools to make the museum's existing and new collections metadata discoverable and accessible, to develop a unique repository with fields that cover existing collection data, but with the capacity to take additional data, including images, and to develop tools and processes whereby the data in the repository could be harvested into Research Data Australia. So the model that we use, so on the left-hand side is what we had for the Hawke Library repository model, and on the right-hand side is the Architecture Museum model. And as you can see, they're actually very similar. There's a few small differences. So folder records are now called sub-series records, but they're the same idea. It's a collection of similar themed items within a series. And there's a new element as well up on the top, which is part of the RIF-CS schema, which we used for this repository, and that's the party records, and they describe the person, group, or institution associated with the collection. So the technology that we used, the application resides in a Windows Server environment using IIS and ASP.NET to serve up the front-end component. The application communicates with a Microsoft SQL Server database for the storage and retrieval of data. We also chose Dublin Core as the metadata schema for the repository with a crosswalk to RIF-CS, and the repository is OAI PMH compliant, and we've set up a monthly harvest which happens automatically to Research Data Australia. And the system documentation is all up on the SourceForge website, so that's all available to anybody who's interested. So some screenshots again. So this is the staff interface, which is used to edit metadata. So this is an example of editing a collection record. And here you can see that there's a link between, hopefully you can see, there's a link between party records and collection records. You actually can't create a collection record in the repository without existing it to without associating it with an already existing party record or by creating a new party record. And staff can also enter metadata similar to the Hawke Library in the notes field, which is not viewable in the public interface. And all the records in the system are hard-coded with the ANZ SRC field of research codes for architecture or architectural history. So this is what the public interface looks like to the repository. And the interface will hopefully replace the individual finding aids which are currently on the Architectural Museum website. So the outcomes of this project, so it started in 2010 We were one of the first groups to start up an ANS project, so we were one of the first people to use the ANS sandbox environment and Research Data Australia, and we obviously ran into a few teething problems, but we did have some really good support from ANS and eResearch SA, and in particular my new BFF Andrew Williams. And on the positive side, because we were one of the earlier groups, we did work with some people from other UniSA institutions, the Ian Wark Research Institute and the University of Adelaide, just by helping them with the sandbox environment and showing them the metadata schemas that we had used for our projects. In October 2010, we were very happy to load the first set of records from South Australia into RDA. Very happy with that achievement. And the project was completed in June 2011 when we harvested 150 collection and party records into Research Data Australia. Outside the scope of the project, we were also lucky to get a little bit of time at the end, and the team developed a public user interface, which you just saw on the last slide, and they also developed some reporting functionality and the ability to generate finding aids from the metadata stored in the repository. On the back of the Architecture Museum repository, the library was approached by two groups within the Division of Health Sciences at UniSA to develop two more research repositories. So this was a venture away from the nice cozy environment of archival collections and into the uncharted waters of scientific research. The first of these was SA Data Link, which I'm going to talk about now, and then I'll move on to the Public Health Group repository in a minute. So launched in 2009, SA Data Link is a joint collaboration between the three South Australian universities, some relevant SA government departments and the Northern Territory government, and it's hosted by UniSA. They provide a high quality data linkage service to support research, policy development, service planning and evaluation. The brief for the project also stated that the repository should support the organisation's business processes, which include requests for data, administration details for receiving data sets from data custodians, and so on. The environment at SA Data Link revealed an ad hoc approach to the management of information, which included using Microsoft SharePoint to manage their documents, using Excel spreadsheets for data collection, and a content management system for storing application processes. Unfortunately, due to high security precautions, it was not deemed possible to store the research data with the metadata in this repository. The research data is now going to be stored in a completely separate repository, which is developed as a separate project. So our repository will just have the metadata, which describes the collections and the data sets that are held separately. There's going to be no link between the metadata and the research data sets. The library is using an agile project methodology for this project, and that will enable a continuous review of the progress and adjustment of requirements as development occurs. It will also ensure that SA Data Link is an active participant throughout the entire development process of the repository. And the model that we use, so it's kind of similar to the earlier ones that we used, but it's slightly more complex. But it still retains the collection and the party and the item level records. An additional element from the RIF-CS schema is activity records, which describe research study application processes, including workflows and documents relating to approvals. The research data sets are shown in this model, but you can see that there's no link between the item records or the collection records or any of the records to them. And the technology that we are using. So the project just began in August 2011. Once again, the application code has been written in Microsoft ASP.NET. The Fedora repository software is being used simply because it's open source and is used by institutions worldwide as a repository for digital content. The library also has extensive experience in implementing the Fedora repository software and believes it offers a wide range of functions that will be used in this solution. The repository will use a database server with MySQL to handle user account and role information. And once again, we're going to be using Dublin Core with a crosswalk to RIF-CS for the metadata. And again, we'll be making sure that it's all OAI PMH compliant, which will allow us to harvest the metadata to external discovery services in the future. So because we're still in development, this is a proposed public interface to the repository, so it'll have a very similar look and feel to the rest of the SANT Data Link website. And the projected outcomes. So the team is currently working on Timebox 4 for the project, which is designing how the metadata will be stored and updated. At the end of the project, we expect to have all of the metadata and documents regarding data sets and research studies centrally located to allow easy access, approval, and processing of the metadata. In addition, SANT Data Link have an existing website and content management system, so the repository will need to seamlessly integrate with the existing site and the user authentication system. So the last repository I want to talk about today, and the second one from Health Sciences, is still very much a work in progress, but I think it's one of the most exciting ones for UniSA, and is really taking the library and the university in the right direction in terms of research repositories. UniSA Public Health Research Group brings together researchers looking at how different social, behavioural and system-level factors influence health. Currently, research data is stored in varied locations in a range of digital media, and the metadata is generally found in research papers or dedicated data dictionaries, and it's often in very different formats. The proposed solution will be a repository which will store, manage and share the research data sets and the associated metadata in a consistent, secure and user-friendly manner. So what we're proposing as well is that this repository will be used as a pilot system for the development of similar repositories for other research areas within UniSA. It's going to promote a high level of consistency in data management and curation within the public health group, and it will also allow researchers to easily share their research with their peers. Furthermore, it's going to assist the uni to meet the requirements of the Australian Code for the Responsible Conduct of Research and its own policy on ownership and retention of data. So the model that we're going to be using is very similar to the one I just showed you on SANT Data Link, and the only change is that there is going to be a link between the data sets and the metadata describing them. So the current status of the project, it has been approved by the Division of Health Sciences and by the library, but we're awaiting funding to start further development. We're hoping to get this at the start of next year, and then we'll be able to start in it in 2012. There's going to be 3 phases in the development of the repository. Phase 1 will include the development of the metadata and research data repository. Then phase 2 will involve the normalization of research data sets for data preservation purposes, and it'll also allow users to edit the data sets within the repository itself. Phase 3 is going to focus on the overall research project, so it'll be more the development of a kind of one-stop shop for researchers to go to from the start of their research project, where they submit applications and ethics approval forms, and I don't tend to know about research projects, but I know that a lot is involved before you actually start up and start running your actual research project. And it'll be with them to store the metadata and store the research data and describe it using the metadata right through to the completion of their project when they produce the outputs of the project, such as the publications and the journal articles. And so that brings me almost to the end. So despite our significant successes, the future of research repositories at UniSA is still uncertain. For the immediate future, I can certainly say that the library is very keen to see some progress in this area, as is the university. So we are getting a lot of support from senior management. Our aim for 2012 is to deliver the public health repository as a pilot for the rest of the uni, and then that's going to be scaled up and changed as we need to do so. We're also keen to meet the needs of the researchers at the institution and develop a space for them to use for the entirety of their research projects. So to return to the original question, when developing your research repository models, can one size fit all? Overall, we believe yes. As you've seen, the model we used in our repositories has altered slightly and evolved as the focus of the repositories has changed from just a simple metadata storage facility to one that also includes the research data. However, the base model must be extensible and flexible, so that elements of that model can be reused and can lead to a consistent approach for metadata repository development. And these are my email address and Mark's email address. If you have any questions now, I think we still have loads of time to take some. Otherwise, we'll be wandering around later.
Do we have any questions?
Generally, it was around maybe half a dozen people that were involved. There was maybe 2 or 3 IT staff that were involved. Yeah, software developer people. And then we included people from the library as well for the metadata expertise. And I am coordinator on quite a few of them as well. So we have involved a lot of people that have come right from the start from the Hawk repository right up, because we're used to how it works this stage, and we can explain it far easier to researchers how it's going to work and what our ideas are as well.
Hi, just wondering if you've got any measures by which you're actually measuring. So have you asked them for a predicted amount of deposit content you'll get in it, or a number of users that will participate with this system? Do you have any kind of benchmarking going on with the systems?
For the earlier ones, so if we have any benchmarking processes, or if we have any idea how many users are going to be using the repository, we were certainly using some tools to figure out how many people were using the Hawk repository at the start, and I can't remember the numbers, but I can find them out for you and email them to you. I'm not really sure about SANT DataLink. I know there has been some group work with researchers and custodians of the data sets to find out what they think of it and what needs to be involved, and we're certainly far too early in the stages of development for the public health research group. Do you have any idea, Mark?
No, the owners of the SAT DataLink system have gone out to researchers and have talked to them about that, but they're not sure at this stage. They already have people using the linked data, but they're not sure. They've got only a dozen of data sets at the moment, but
somebody else over there. Mark? It is something that we've definitely thought about, and versioning has been one of the things that the Public Health Research Group have brought up quite a few times when we've talked about that in the process. But I'm not sure how. I know, is that part of phase 2 or maybe phase 3 further down the track?
phase 2 of that project was normalize the data into a similar database logic. So in that stage, yes, we can do that. Prior to that, we have to convert whole databases or data sets. When it's normalized as a similar data set, then the original request was to sort of audit changes at the field level, which doing a lot of work with some of the database experts, that's not really a plausible way of versioning data. So we'd be looking at doing a row-based audit.
Are there any other questions? No, I have one. Your e-health data sets, do you know what they might be?
The Public Health Research Group ones. We did speak to some researchers initially, and I think one of them was dealing with research that they were doing in the Northern Territory, but I'm very vague about the whole thing. I'm not really 100% sure, but I know that they certainly have a lot of projects that they have received large grants for, which would be shoved into it, and they do have a lot of stuff that the person there that is dealing with it on quite a substantial basis that will also be put in. So they certainly have enough research data to put into it, but we haven't been privy to that information yet, simply because it's still so early in the development stages of it. I'm not, but Mark might be. Topic maps? Yep.
Something like a dog walk, library, seems to be the sort of thing that other people get, as to go up into the website.
Okay. Well, I haven't heard of them, so it's something we could certainly look into now. We certainly don't go out and elicit extra work to do for ourselves, but with the Architecture Museum, because they are an archival institution, and obviously the Hawke Library is an archival institution within UniSA, we were very familiar with them already, and when we started developing our repository, it was something they were always very keen to see. So once it was finished, they did have a look and said, yes, please, I'd like one of those. For the health sciences ones, I'm not sure how word got out that we were developing research repositories, but it was something that Public Health Research Group and SA&T Datalink, they both came to us at the same time looking for us to develop something for them. And it's possibly because we've been talking at a few of these things, and the university librarian has been publicly talking about them as well to other, possibly the research office, and that's how word has gotten out. So we're very happy to be doing it. It's something we're very excited about, and certainly something that we're very keen to see progressing.
Okay, I guess it's time for lunch. Thanks to the speakers.
Thank you.